Welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Whisperer for the week of May 12th. Just returned home from the world's largest security conference, the RSA Security Conference, held in San Francisco, and what a fantastic week. Attendance was up this year from last year, about 45,000 security practitioners and vendor partners. And I do have the privilege of serving on the RSA Program Committee for the Governance Risk Compliance track. And when you look across the submissions that came in on all the tracks, there were really three key themes that were on the hearts and minds of security practitioners. And one is burnout, really burnout related to the threat of ransomware and protecting your companies from ransomware. As in addition, personal liability, the personal liability of security leaders. And in fact, I had the privilege of attending the Cyber Leaders Forum there. And we got to hear from Joe Sullivan, who, of course, was the former CISO at Uber, and the challenges that he went through when he was charged. And Tim Brown from SolarWinds was also there. And, of course, he's had many health issues following his breach, had a heart attack and some other things. So this is real. And kudos to RSA for calling it out and talking about, RSAC, of course, with the hashtag RSA conference, but it also means, commitment and community and content, and connections, knowing that we have to do this together. We're all in this together. And so even had the opportunity to have dinner and meet with a small group of peers that got to meet with Jason Sudeikis or Ted Lasso. I'm talking about how every episode that he wrote of Ted Lasso, how he was always positive and always encouraging, and even in the face of constant negativity. And so really came out of the conference energized to always try to find the best in every situation. The second theme that, of course, that speakers submitted was AI. Certainly AI is real, and it is increasing the speed at which the bad guys are attacking. But I still think at the end of the day right now, if you're doing the basics, you still should be protected from all those threats from the AI attacks. And then finally, the third theme was risk management, third-party risk management. Talk about XZUtils or MoveIt or all the third parties that we rely on and that we're connected to, making sure that they are that they are protecting our data as well. Now moving on to some news from the week, Zscaler. Zscaler is a large secure web gateway company, and they had an incident this week that someone went on X, Twitter, and said, "Hey, I'm trying to sell this Zscaler data on the dark web." And Zscaler took it very seriously. They immediately hired an outside, they followed their incident response plan, got an IR firm to come in, who quickly determined, just similar to some other breaches, yes, it was actually theirs. It was an isolated system in a test environment with no customer data, and it wasn't connected to their production environment. So kudos to them. They still immediately took it down. They're still going to investigate how it was breached. But it did have an impact on their stock price, and so it'll be interesting to see how long that takes to recover. And then Change Healthcare CEO Andrew Whitty did testify in front of Congress this week. He did say that on the week of February 12th, hackers exploited compromised credentials, either phished or stolen credentials, to gain access to a Citrix portal used by Change Healthcare that had no MFA on it. And so he talked about, yes, he was personally the one that decided to pay the $22 million ransom. He said it was the hardest decision he's ever made. He would never wish it on anyone. Ultimately, we know that went to Alfie and to the Alpha Group, and that ultimately they didn't pay it to them, the third party that actually did the breach. And so that group was still trying to ransom Change again. So the data is going to be leaked anyway and sold, and so it didn't do them any good to pay the ransom. Speaking of the liability, the personal liability, there was another article that came out this week talking about how CISOs can avoid being liable for data breaches by following legal advice, communicating effectively with internal and external stakeholders, and demonstrating commitment to avoiding future incidents. So hopefully just doing the right thing and being transparent. They said the key to minimize personal liability for these security leaders after a data breach is just to act reasonable and responsible. The current state of the law is that those involved in an org that is threatened or affected by a breach are expected to react reasonably under the circumstances. And so you should engage and follow legal advice, communicate effectively, demonstrate a commitment to addressing the breach and preventing future incidents. And just by following these recommendations, you can really navigate the challenging terrain while minimizing your own personal liability. Now, speaking of some interesting things that came up this week from the Marriott breach, back in 2018, they admitted that they had falsely claimed for 5 years that they were using encryption. They were trying to get their case thrown out. And so they had said that they used AES 128, and it was so strong that the case against them should be dismissed. But their attorneys this week admitted in an April 10th hearing that it had never used AES 128 during the time of the breach. In fact, they haven't been using encryption at all. Rather, they were using the secure hash algorithm SHA-1, which is just that, a hashing mechanism, not encryption. So certainly more to come on that. Sure, many of you are probably familiar with the Verizon Data Breach Report that comes out every year. A very valuable report going cross-industry. And the 5 key takeaways from the report that came out this week was that the MOVEit zero-day vuln drove a really big jump in breaches. It almost tripled the increase, up 180% in attacks involving the exploitation of vulnerabilities. And, of course, we saw mass exploitation of the MOVEit zero-day vulnerability in 2023. Second is ransomware and extortion, of course, continues to grow. No surprise there, accounting for a high of 32% of all breaches. And given the prevalence of ransomware, it was a top threat across 92% of the industries, and the average cost of the attacks also up. Third, the human element, still accounts for a substantial amount of these breaches. 68% of breaches in 23, roughly the same as 22, involved a non-malicious human element. So it just demonstrates how people still remain, probably the highest risk in the security chain, and there's still significant scope for security awareness to really reduce the impact of breaches. Fourth is the unintended errors are leading to incidents. Talk about breaches involving errors accounting for almost a third of the incidents in 23. Misconfigurations, clicking on links, sending information or data unencrypted outside of the org that falls into the wrong hands. And finally, kind of the inverse of maybe what you're thinking, but the fifth one is education is actually improving how people identify phishing attempts. So the 2023 data showed that 20% of people correctly identified phishing in simulations when you get a phishing test, while 11% of the people who clicked on an email also reported that they had done so. And so this continues really an upward trend where the rate of users reporting phishing in simulation tests and engagements has been rising over the past few years. Next, Microsoft, continues to respond to the scathing report they got from the government and the review board, the cyber review board, on how they're not protecting our own environments and its critical infrastructure. And so they continue to add and shuffle security execs in the wake of these reports. They appointed new product security chiefs as well as customer-facing CISO. So again, they added a CISO to the product teams, and they appointed a new deputy CISO to liaise with the customers. And these are really, part of an ongoing attempt to revamp their approach to security in the wake of these high-profile attacks, where the company's emails were breached, and a sharp rebuke from the federal government that we talked about, a few weeks ago. Finally, ending on a high note, a good note, the administrator of the ransomware operation Lockbit was named and charged and had his assets frozen. And, of course, this is the notorious Lockbit ransomware as a service. Was indicted Tuesday in the U.S. on more than 24 criminal charges. In addition, the U.S., the U.K., and the Australian government have frozen some of his assets and issued travel bans against him. And so, again, great work there. And hopefully that actually has an impact and will help reduce some of the ransomware that we're seeing. Again, like and subscribe. Any questions in the comments, be happy to respond, and look forward to chatting with you again next week.